I still remember her exact words at our 4th of July barbecue. "If you disappeared tomorrow, Melanie, no one would even notice." Everyone laughed, including my husband, James. 3 months later, when I actually disappeared from their lives, they finally noticed. Just not in the way they expected. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family or relationship, this story might hit close to home. I'm sharing this because I know I'm not alone. While you're settling in for this family betrayal journey, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. If my story of finally standing up to my toxic in-laws resonates with you, consider subscribing for more real family drama stories that prove karma is real. When I first met James Bennett at a charity gala 8 years ago, I thought I'd won the lottery. He was handsome, successful, and came from what appeared to be the perfect American family. The Bennetts were Charlotte royalty, old money, social, connections, and a beautiful estate in the most prestigious neighbourhood. I was Melanie Collins then, a marketing graduate from a modest background in Tennessee who'd worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. James pursued me relentlessly. He said I was different from the other women he'd dated, more authentic, less concerned with status. The irony of that statement would only become clear to me years later. We married after a whirlwind romance, and I was introduced to my new family with all the appropriate fanfare. Richard Bennett, my father-in-law, was a retired judge who still wielded considerable influence in local politics. His handshake was firm, but his eyes never quite warmed when they looked at me. Diane, my mother-in-law, was the quintessential Southern socialite, perfectly coiffed silver hair, tennis twice a week, and a smile that never reached her eyes when directed at me. "We're just so pleased James finally settled down," she said, at our engagement dinner, emphasizing the word finally, as if to suggest I was some last resort choice for her precious son. Then there was Vanessa, James's younger sister, beautiful, unmarried, and the apple of her daddy's eye. She had the same sandy blonde hair as James, the same patrician nose, and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. But there was something calculated in her gaze when she looked at me, something that made me feel assessed and found wanting. "Welcome to the family," she'd said, air-kissing near my cheeks. "We'll have to work on your wardrobe." I spent years trying to fit in with the Bennetts. I straightened my naturally curly hair because Diane once mentioned it looked unprofessional. I took tennis lessons even though I hated the sport. I learned which forks to use at their formal dinners and memorized the names of all their country. Club friends. I even started softening my Tennessee accent, adopting the genteel Charlotte drawl that characterized the Bennett speech patterns. James and I both worked at Bennett Marketing, the family company founded by Richard before he went into law. James was being groomed to take over as CEO, while I had worked my way up to executive level on my own merit. At least that's what I thought at the time. The annual 4th of July barbecue at the Bennett estate was a tradition dating back to Richard's father. It wasn't the casual affair the name suggested. It was a carefully orchestrated social event where the family showcased their prominence to about 100 of Charlotte's elite. White tents on manicured lawns, catering staff in crisp uniforms, and a fireworks display that reportedly cost more than my first car. "This year's barbecue is particularly important," James had told me as we drove to his parents' estate. "Dad's invited Senator Williams and his wife." I nodded, feeling a flutter of excitement. "I have news too. The Nakamura account is confirmed. We're officially going international." I'd spent 6 months courting Nakamura Industries, a Japanese tech giant looking to expand their American presence. Landing them as a client would transform Bennett Marketing from a regional powerhouse to a global player. I'd prepared a presentation, worked with Japanese translators, and even learned basic business Japanese phrases to impress them. The contract had been signed yesterday. "That's great, honey," James said distractedly, checking his phone. "Listen, Vanessa's bringing her new boyfriend today. Dad's skeptical, so try to make him feel welcome, okay?" I swallowed my disappointment. This was my biggest professional achievement, but somehow Vanessa's love life took precedence. Still, I nodded and smiled. That's what I always did with the Bennetts. Nod, smile, and try harder to belong. What I didn't know then was that this barbecue wouldn't be just another exercise in familial disappointment. It would be the day everything changed, the day I finally saw the truth about my place in the Bennett family. I wasn't just an outsider, I was invisible by design. The Bennett estate looked like something from a Southern Living magazine spread that 4th of July. Red, white and blue bunting draped elegantly from the columned porch. Staff in coordinating outfits circulated with trays of mint juleps and artisanal appetizers that were decidedly not traditional barbecue fare. A string quartet played patriotic melodies near the rose garden while the actual grilling happened out of sight, conducted by a chef from a 5-star restaurant downtown. I'd spent the morning baking my grandmother's peach pie from scratch. It was the one family recipe I treasured, a connection to my roots that I thought might finally impress Diane, who fancied herself something of a domestic goddess despite having a full household staff. "You brought dessert." Diane's perfectly penciled eyebrows arched when I presented the pie. "Oh, honey, we have a patisserie handling the dessert table, but we can put this somewhere." She handed the pie to a passing server without another word. I smoothed down my new dress, a navy designer number that had cost a month's personal spending budget, and tried not to let my disappointment show. James had already disappeared to greet the senator, leaving me to fend for myself. Richard Bennett held court near the bar, his imposing figure still fit and straight despite being in his 70s. "Melanie," he acknowledged when I approached. "Is James with you?" "He's speaking with Senator Williams," I replied. "Good, good." He nodded, then turned to continue his conversation with the bank president beside him, effectively dismissing me. I spotted Michael, James's older brother, and his wife Catherine near the pool. Of all the Bennets, Catherine was the most genuinely kind to me, perhaps because she too had married into the family. She wasn't from wealth either, though her background in art history and her natural grace made her transition appear seamless. "Melanie, you look gorgeous." Catherine hugged me warmly. "How are you holding up? These events always make me need an extra glass of champagne." I laughed, feeling some tension release. "I'm okay. Actually, I have some exciting news about work." "There you are!" Vanessa's voice cut through our conversation as she approached, a tall man with a carefully groomed beard in tow. "Catherine, Melanie, this is Preston, my sister-in-law, and my brother's wife." I noticed the distinction immediately. Catherine was identified as a sister-in-law, while I was merely my brother's wife. It was a subtle dig, but typical of Vanessa's approach. The afternoon progressed with the choreographed precision of all Bennett events. I circulated, made appropriate small talk, and kept looking for an opportunity to share my news about the Nakamura account. When lunch was served at the elegantly set tables on the lawn, I found myself seated at the family table, but positioned at the far end, away from James, who sat between his mother and the senator's wife. As dessert was being served, not my pie, but elaborate red, white and blue pastries from the aforementioned patisserie, Richard stood to make his customary toast. He spoke about family legacy, American values, and then proudly announced that Bennett Marketing had secured a meeting with Nakamura Industries next week. "James has been working tirelessly on this initiative to take our company international." Richard raised his glass. "To the future of Bennett Marketing." I froze, my champagne glass halfway to my lips. That was my account, my connection, my 6 months of work. I looked at James, expecting him to correct his father, to acknowledge my contribution. He merely smiled and accepted the congratulations flowing his way. When the toasts opened to other family members, Vanessa stood, her champagne flute held, aloft, her expression mischievous. "I'd like to make a toast too," she announced, her voice carrying across the lawn. "To my wonderful brother James, who proves every day that the Bennett drive for success lives on." She paused, her gaze finding me at the end of the table. "And to Melanie, who's always there, somewhere in the background." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the guests. "You know," Vanessa continued, her tone light, but her eyes sharp, "I realised something funny the other day. If you disappeared tomorrow, Melanie, no one would even notice. You're basically just James's shadow anyway." The laughter grew louder, more confident. I felt heat rise to my face as I looked around the table. Richard was chuckling, Diane was hiding a smile behind her napkin, and various family friends were openly laughing. But it was James's reaction that broke something inside me. My husband, the man who'd promised to stand by me, was laughing too. He even reached over to pat Vanessa's arm affectionately, as if to say, "Good one." In that moment, surrounded by people I'd spent years trying to impress, trying to belong with, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. I carefully set down my napkin, excused myself with a murmured apology that no one seemed to hear, and walked with measured steps toward the house. In the pristine guest bathroom, with its monogrammed hand towels and expensive scented soaps, I stared at my reflection. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She had the right clothes, the right hair, the right makeup to be a Bennett. But her eyes held a pain that couldn't be concealed by any designer dress or careful cosmetics. If you disappeared, tomorrow no one would even notice. The worst part wasn't that Vanessa had said it. The worst part was that she was right. James and I met at the spring charity gala for Charlotte Children's Hospital. I was there representing my first marketing firm, a small agency where I'd been working since graduation. James literally bumped into me at the champagne table, spilling my drink. "I'm so terribly sorry," he'd said, his blue eyes crinkling with genuine concern. He was tall, classically handsome, and his tailored tuxedo screamed old money. "Please, let me get you another." We spent the rest of the evening talking. James seemed fascinated by my background, my childhood in rural Tennessee, working on my grandfather's farm during summers, putting myself through college. He said I was refreshingly real compared to the women he usually met. "You have no idea how tiresome it can be," he'd confided. "Everyone wanting you for your family name. Or money." Looking back, there were warning signs from the beginning about how the Bennett family would treat me. Our third date was a dinner at his parents' home. Richard had asked about my family with thinly veiled condescension. "Collins? I don't believe I know any Collins in Charlotte society." "My parents still live in Tennessee, sir," I'd explained. "Quaint," Diane had commented with a tight smile. At our engagement dinner, I noticed I was subtly excluded from the family photos. "Oh, let's get one with just the Bennetts," Diane had said, gently manoeuvring me aside. "For the family album, you understand." After we married, James and I moved into a house in an upscale neighborhood, paid for by his parents as a wedding gift. I tried to decorate it to reflect both our tastes, but gradually my contributions disappeared. My grandmother's quilt was relegated to a guest room closet. The pottery I'd collected from local artists mysteriously broke, or was replaced with Diane's selections from designer showrooms. At Bennett Marketing, where I'd been hired based on my portfolio and prior success, I found myself consistently sidelined in meetings. My ideas would be dismissed until James repeated them later, at which point they became brilliant innovations. I was assigned the accounts no one else wanted, yet somehow expected to produce miraculous results. I had a recurring nightmare during those years. In it, I would be standing in the middle of the Bennett living room during a family gathering. I would speak, but no sound would come out. I would wave my arms, but no one would look my way. Then, slowly my body would start to fade, becoming transparent until I disappeared completely. The Bennetts would continue their conversation, never noticing I was gone. I tried so hard to win them over. I volunteered for Diane's charity committees, spending weekends at silent auctions and benefit luncheons. I attended every boring legal dinner with Richard, listening attentively to the same stories about his famous cases. I even tried to bond with Vanessa, inviting her for shopping trips and spa days, which she usually rescheduled or cancelled at the last minute. There were so many small humiliations, incidents that seemed minor in isolation, but formed a pattern when viewed together. The time Diane served shellfish at a family dinner, despite my severe allergy being well documented. "Oh, I completely forgot," she'd said as I felt my throat begin to tighten. "James, didn't you tell me?" Or the countless times Richard called me Melissa at family gatherings, the name of James's college girlfriend. "Sorry, Melanie." he'd correct himself without real contrition. You remind me of her sometimes. At Bennett Marketing, I worked twice as hard as anyone else. I stayed late, came in weekends, and built solid relationships with clients who specifically requested to work with me. I brought in the Harrington account after their previous agency dropped the ball, $1 million client that significantly boosted the company's annual revenue. Yet at the year-end party, James was given credit for saving the Harrington relationship. The 4th of July barbecue wasn't the first time Vanessa had made me the butt of her jokes. There was the Christmas party, where she'd given me a book, titled Social Graces for the Unrefined, as my gift exchange present. I thought you could use it, she'd said while everyone tittered. Or the Easter brunch, where she'd loudly wondered if my fashion sense was intentionally retro or just hopelessly outdated. What made the barbecue different was the clarity it brought me. Sitting in that bathroom, I finally understood that the joke about my disappearance wasn't just a one-off cruel comment. It was the articulation of how they had always seen me, as inconsequential, as dispensable, as invisible. I had spent 7 years of marriage and countless hours of effort trying to become the person they would accept. I had dimmed my own light, altered my appearance, changed my speech patterns, abandoned my interests, and sublimated my professional accomplishments, all to fit into their world. And still I remained invisible. Worse than invisible, I was a punchline. As I sat there in that pristine bathroom with its monogrammed towels and family crest subtly embossed on the wallpaper, something shifted inside me. The hurt began to harden into something else, something colder, more resolute. If they thought I was invisible, perhaps that was an advantage they had given me without realizing it. People don't guard their secrets from someone they don't see. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always be beautifully visible in your own life. I didn't confront James about the barbecue incident. I didn't mention Vanessa's cruel joke or his laughter. What would be the point? He would deny the malice, minimize my feelings, or worst of all, suggest I was overreacting. Instead, I retreated, into myself, creating an invisible wall between us that he, predictably, didn't notice. The weeks following the 4th of July barbecue, I developed insomnia. I would lie awake beside my sleeping husband, replaying years of subtle humiliations and wondering how I had allowed myself to become so diminished. During the day, I moved through my routine like a ghost, present but not really there. I spoke less in meetings, declined social invitations with the Bennetts, and spent more time alone. James, meanwhile, was consumed with the Nakamura account, my account. He was flying to Tokyo the following month for meetings he hadn't prepared for and didn't understand the nuances of. When I offered my notes and research, he waved them away. "I've got this handled, Mel," he said distractedly. "The international expansion is my project now. Dad wants me to focus on it exclusively." It happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the barbecue. James had forgotten his tablet at home, and his assistant Emily called to ask if I could email some files from it for an urgent meeting. I knew his password, or thought I did, but it didn't work. After several attempts, I tried a different one, Vanessa's birthday. The tablet unlocked. I found the files Emily needed and was about to email them when a notification popped up. It was an email from Vanessa with the subject line, "Melanie problem." My finger hovered over the notification for just a second before I tapped it. The email opened to reveal a thread between James and his sister dating back months. My hands began to shake as I read, "From James to Vanessa. Subject, Melanie. Problem V. Dad's right. We need to minimize her involvement with Nakamura. She's getting too much direct contact with them. I've redirected their latest communications to come through me. Can you make sure she's assigned to the Davidson account revision? That should keep her busy while we finalize Tokyo. J. From Vanessa to James. Subject, Melanie problem already on it. I told Davidson they needed a complete rebrand ASAP. That should keep your little wife occupied while the adults handle Nakamura. She actually believes she brought them in. Hilarious. Dad says once the international division is established, we can review her position. Maybe a lateral move to HR. Less damage she can do there. V from James. To, Vanessa. Subject, Melanie. Problem perfect. She's been asking about coming to Tokyo. Obviously, that's not happening. I'm thinking of telling her we need to postpone starting a family until after the expansion. That should keep her focused on our future while we sort out her professional. 1. J. The email thread continued. Dozens of exchanges between my husband and his sister, all centered around how to manage me, sideline me, and ultimately remove me from meaningful work at the company I had helped build. My hands were ice cold as I set down the tablet. I felt physically ill, but something inside me had gone very, very calm. With methodical precision, I forwarded the entire email thread to my personal account, then deleted the forwarded email from the sent folder. That night, I waited until James was asleep before getting up. I took his tablet again and began a systematic search through his digital life. I found a second email account I'd never known about. The password took me longer this time, but eventually I tried Melissa Forever, his college girlfriend's name. It opened. This account contained communications with his father about the company's financial structures. I discovered plans to restructure the company before the international expansion, creating a new parent entity where my ownership shares would be significantly diluted. There were discussions about performance issues they were documenting against me, all fabricated, to justify removing me from leadership once the expansion was complete. Most devastating was an email exchange with his assistant Emily. It wasn't just professional. They had been having an affair for at least a year. There were intimate messages, plans for their business trips, and even discussions about their future together once James handled his situation at home. I sat in our home office until dawn broke, methodically going through every email, every attachment, every betrayal. I downloaded everything to a secure cloud account. By morning, I had a complete picture of the extent to which my husband, his family, and even the company I worked for had been conspiring against me. I've never been one to break down in crisis. Growing up the way I did, you learn to save your tears for later and deal with what's in front of you. That morning, as I heard James stirring upstairs, I made a decision. They had made me invisible. Now I would use that invisibility as my power. If you've ever felt your trust completely shattered by the people closest to you, you know that moment when the pain transforms into a strange kind of clarity. Everything suddenly makes sense, all the small inconsistencies, the dismissive comments, the exclusions that you'd rationalized away. In that moment, you have a choice: remain the victim they've cast you as, or rewrite the story entirely. I chose the latter. They thought I was just James's shadow. They would soon learn that shadows can grow very dark indeed when the light is extinguished. I've always been methodical. It's what made me good at my job despite the Bennetts' efforts to undermine me. Now, I applied that same methodical approach to my exit strategy. I would need 3 months to execute everything perfectly, 3 months, during which I would continue to play the role of the dutiful, oblivious wife and employee. The day after discovering the emails, I made an appointment with Patricia Winters, a divorce attorney known for handling high-profile splits involving business assets. I paid her retainer in cash from my personal savings. The challenge here, Patricia explained in our initial consultation, will be documenting the financial misconduct while protecting your interests in the company. I handed her a flash drive. I've already started. Her eyebrows rose as she reviewed the files. This is unusually thorough. I'm just getting started, I assured her. Over the following weeks, I created a comprehensive record of my contributions to Bennett Marketing. I saved emails from clients praising my work. I documented instances where my ideas had been implemented under James's name. I recovered presentations I had created that James had presented as his own. But most importantly, I began quietly copying. Evidence of financial irregularities I discovered while exploring James's hidden communications. Richard Bennett, for all his legal knowledge, had been playing fast and loose with company accounting. There were questionable tax deductions, misleading statements to investors, and a pattern of financial reporting that walked a fine line between creative accounting and outright fraud. I also discovered something that made my blood run cold. 20 years ago, when Richard was still a practicing judge, he had buried evidence in a case involving one of his college friends. The friend's company had knowingly released a product with safety defects that resulted in a child's death. Richard had ensured the case was dismissed on technical grounds. The family had never received justice, and Richard had later received a very generous loan from his friend that was never repaid. I found this information in a scanned letter kept in a password-protected folder. Richard had kept it as insurance against his friend, but now it would serve as my insurance against Richard. Meanwhile, I began establishing my own financial independence. I opened new accounts at a bank the Bennetts didn't use. I transferred small amounts regularly from my personal savings to avoid triggering any alerts. I sold jewellery James had given me, pieces I had never particularly liked anyway, and converted the proceeds to cash. I reached out to my brother Alex in Atlanta. We had drifted apart after my marriage, partly because the Bennetts had subtly discouraged me from maintaining close ties with my simple family. Alex was surprised but immediately supportive. I never liked them, he admitted during our phone call. But I figured you knew what you were doing. I didn't, I said honestly, but I do now. Alex offered his guest room for as long as I needed it. He also put me in touch with a former college friend who owned a marketing firm in Atlanta and was looking to expand. By the end of the second month, I had secured an apartment in Atlanta under my maiden name, lined up preliminary interviews with 3 marketing firms, and prepared a comprehensive file for the Securities and Exchange Commission detailing Bennett Marketing's financial irregularities. I also began moving my personal belongings out of the house in small batches, photo albums from before my marriage, the few family heirlooms I had managed to keep, clothes James never noticed I wore. I stored them temporarily at a small storage unit paid for in cash. The hardest part was maintaining the facade at work and at home. I smiled through family dinners, nodded at James's self-aggrandizing stories, and pretended not to notice when he came home late smelling of Emily's distinctive perfume. At the office, I diligently worked on the Davidson account rebrand, knowing it was busy work designed to sideline me. I even attended a charity lunch with Diane, where she spent 2 hours criticizing my contributions to the silent auction. Perhaps next year you could focus on just helping with the setup, dear. The procurement of items requires certain connections. Through it all, I maintained my composure, playing the role they had assigned me, the insignificant, invisible Melanie who didn't warrant their concern or attention. What gave me strength during those weeks was knowing what they didn't. I saw everything now, every manipulation, every lie, every betrayal. And for someone supposedly so invisible, I sure knew a lot of their secrets. As my departure date grew closer, I finalized the last details. I scheduled the delivery of my SEC evidence for exactly 1 week after I would be gone. I prepared emails to Bennett Marketing's key clients expressing concerns about the company's stability and financial reporting, set to send automatically after my disappearance. I transferred my personal investment in the company, a significant amount that James had always dismissed as cute that you want to contribute, to my new accounts. The withdrawal would create immediate cash flow issues for the company, but would be completely legal. The night before James was scheduled to leave for a business trip to Chicago, actually a weekend with Emily at a lakeside resort, according to their emails, I sat across from him at dinner, feeling a strange sense of peace. "Everything okay?" he asked, barely glancing up from his phone. "You're quiet tonight." "Just thinking about the future," I replied, which was entirely true. "Don't worry about the Tokyo expansion," he said, misinterpreting my comment. "Once it's established, we'll be in an even better position. Trust me." I smiled. "I always have." The irony seemed lost on him. The morning James left for his business trip with Emily, he kissed me distractedly on the cheek and reminded me to water the plants on the deck, as if that would be my primary concern while he was gone. I smiled, wished him a productive trip, and watched his car disappear down our tree-lined street. I had already said my silent goodbyes to Bennett Marketing the previous day. I had walked through the offices one last time, nodding to colleagues who had never really seen me. I had touched the conference room table where I had presented countless campaigns. I had even taken a moment in the small office I had earned through years of hard work, looking at the view of downtown Charlotte that had once symbolised my success. My last interaction had been with Catherine, Michael's wife, who caught me looking wistful as I left the building. "Everything okay, Melanie?" she had asked with genuine concern. For a moment, I had considered confiding in her. Catherine had always been kind, always seen me when others looked through me, but involving her would only complicate her own position in the family. "Just tired," I had replied with a smile. "Have a good weekend." Now, with James gone, I began the final phase of my plan. I moved methodically through our house, collecting only what truly mattered to me: my grandmother's recipes, photos from my life before James, the first marketing award I had won in college. I left all the designer clothes, the expensive jewellery, the status symbols that had never really felt like mine. I transferred the last of my documents to my lawyer with explicit instructions. Patricia had been initially concerned about my approach, but had come to understand my reasoning. "They won't know what hit them," she had said during our final meeting. "But are you sure this is what you want? We could pursue a more conventional divorce with significant compensation." "This isn't about money," I had explained. "It's about finally being seen." I scheduled the delivery of my evidence to the SEC for exactly 1 week later, giving me time to be well established in Atlanta before the storm hit. I set up the automated emails to key clients, carefully worded to express concern without making actionable allegations. The most difficult task was writing the note I would leave for James. I went through dozens of drafts, ranging from pages of detailed grievances to a simple goodbye. In the end, I settled on something that I knew would haunt him. "Now you can see what happens when I disappear." I placed the note on his pillow, a final touch that would greet him upon his return from his weekend with Emily. As I carried my 2 suitcases to my car, I paused on the front steps of the house I had tried so hard to make a home. The Bennett estate loomed in the distance, visible from our driveway, a constant reminder of the family I had never truly been part of. I felt no sadness, no regret, just a strange sense of lightness. For years, I had contorted myself to fit into spaces too small for my spirit. Now I was reclaiming my full self. The drive to Atlanta took just under 4 hours. I didn't play music or make calls. I simply drove, watching the Carolina landscape give way to Georgia, feeling each mile create distance between myself and the life I was leaving behind. Alex was waiting for me when I arrived, his familiar face a welcome sight after so many years of limited contact. He helped me with my bags, showed me to his guest room, and then did something that made tears finally spring to my eyes. He hugged me and said, "Welcome back, Mel. I've missed you." For the first time in years, someone saw me, really saw me, and it was like coming home to myself. That night, as I lay in bed in my brother's guest room, I thought about James returning to an empty house, finding my note, realising that his invisible wife had slipped away while he was with his mistress. I imagined his confusion turning to panic as he discovered what else had disappeared. The evidence of his family's misconduct, his financial secrets, the carefully constructed narrative of Bennett's superiority. I thought about Vanessa's joke at the barbecue and felt a grim satisfaction. They had never noticed me, but they would certainly notice when I was gone. Ter in your life are the ones who see you completely and love what they see. My new life in Atlanta began with a strange sense of calm. I rented a modest apartment in Midtown, interviewed with several marketing firms, and accepted a position with Horizon Marketing, where Alex's friend Marcus was a partner. I explained my situation honestly, that I was leaving a toxic marriage and needed a fresh start, and Marcus valued my portfolio and experience enough to bring me on as a senior account manager. From a safe distance, I watched the Bennett saga unfold through social media, industry news, and occasional updates from Patricia. The first few days after my departure played out exactly as I had anticipated. James returned from his weekend with Emily to find an empty house and my cryptic note. According to Patricia, who had received a frantic call from his lawyer, his initial reaction wasn't concern but annoyance. He assumed I was having some kind of emotional episode and would, return once I got it out of my system. That changed quickly when he discovered I had withdrawn my investment from the company. Bennett Marketing operated with a surprisingly precarious cash flow despite its prestigious reputation. My withdrawal, completely legal and documented, created an immediate financial crisis just as they were preparing for the Tokyo expansion. 3 days after I left, the emails to key clients were automatically sent. They were carefully worded, expressing my personal concerns about recent observations regarding financial stability, without making specific allegations that could be considered defamatory. Coming from me, someone clients trusted and had worked with directly, these vague warnings were enough to cause serious concern. By the end of the first week, 2 major clients had put their contracts on hold, pending clarification of certain financial matters. James and Richard were scrambling to reassure everyone while simultaneously trying to locate me. Patricia forwarded me an email from James's lawyer. Mr. Bennett is extremely concerned about his wife's mental health and well-being. Her actions are completely out of character and potentially self-destructive. He merely wishes to ensure her safety and provide any necessary support. I laughed out loud when I read it. Even now, they were trying to control the narrative, casting me as unstable rather than acknowledging their own misconduct. The real chaos began when my SEC file was delivered. Within days, Bennett Marketing was under preliminary investigation. All international expansion plans were immediately frozen. The company's assets were placed under scrutiny, and Richard's creative accounting practices were exposed to unwelcome official attention. I followed the unfolding drama on social media with detached interest. Vanessa's Instagram, once a carefully curated showcase of Bennett privilege, became increasingly frantic. Her posts shifted from designer outfits and exotic vacations to vague references about standing by family in difficult times and the truth will prevail. One particular post caught my attention, a throwback photo of her and James as children, with the caption, "Blood is thicker than water. Some people will never understand family loyalty." The irony was almost too perfect. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my life. I reconnected with college friends I had lost touch with during my Bennett years. I joined a book club, took up hiking in the North Georgia mountains, and even started dating casually. Nothing serious, but enough to remind myself that I was desirable and interesting in my own right. At Horizon Marketing, I quickly established myself as a valuable team member. Without the Bennett shadow looming over me, my confidence and creativity flourished. Within 2 months, I had brought in 2 new clients and was leading a successful campaign for a regional healthcare provider. Throughout this period, James's attempts to contact me grew increasingly desperate. He progressed from annoyed to angry to pleading. His texts and emails, which I never responded to but Patricia monitored, evolved from "This childish behaviour needs to stop immediately" to "Please, Mel, we need to talk. I don't understand what's happening." By the 3rd month, the Bennett family was in full crisis mode. The SEC investigation had expanded to include Richard's judicial misconduct. An enterprising financial journalist had picked up the story, publishing a detailed exposé of the Bennett Empire's questionable foundations. The family home, the site of that fateful 4th of July barbecue, was put on the market to cover mounting legal fees. The most unexpected development came when Catherine, Michael's wife, reached out to me directly. Unlike the other Bennetts, she didn't demand explanations or hurl accusations. Her email was simple and direct. "I don't blame you for leaving. I've often thought about doing the same. Would it be possible to talk?" I hesitated, but eventually agreed to a phone call. Catherine revealed that the Bennett facade was crumbling completely. Michael was drinking heavily, Richard had suffered a minor heart attack after being served with investigation papers, and Diane was frantically trying to maintain social connections that were rapidly abandoning the family. "Vanessa's the worst," Catherine confided. "She's convinced you orchestrated this whole thing as some kind of revenge for her joke at the barbecue." I couldn't help but laugh. "It wasn't the joke," I explained. "It was the truth behind it." "I know," Catherine said, quietly. "I always saw how they treated you. I should have said something." "We all make our choices," I replied, without bitterness. As the 3-month mark of my disappearance approached, I felt mixed emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing the Bennets face consequences for their actions, but also a strange grief for what might have been if James had truly been the man I thought I had married. There was freedom in my new life, but also occasional moments of doubt and loneliness. What I never felt, however, was regret. I had reclaimed myself from invisibility. I had refused to remain a shadow. Whatever came next would be on my terms, in a world where I was fully seen. What I didn't expect was that James would track me down, but he did, showing up unannounced at my office in Atlanta exactly 3 months after I had walked away from our life together. His appearance would force a confrontation I hadn't planned for, but perhaps needed to truly close this chapter of my life. I was reviewing a campaign proposal when my assistant knocked on my office door. "There's a James Bennet here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's insisting it's urgent." My heart stuttered for a moment before resuming at a faster pace. I had known this moment might come, but facing it was another matter entirely. "Give me 5 minutes, then send him in," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I used those 5 minutes to centre myself. I straightened my desk, checked my appearance in my compact mirror, and took several deep breaths. This wasn't the Melanie who had shrunk herself to fit into the Bennet world. This was the new Melanie, confident, independent, and completely visible. When James walked in, I barely recognised him. The polished, confident man I had married looked haggard and dishevelled. His normally impeccable clothes were wrinkled, his hair needed cutting, and there were dark circles under his eyes. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old connection, an instinct to comfort him that I immediately suppressed. "Melanie," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "You're really here?" "I am," I replied calmly. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't easy," he admitted, remaining standing even though I had gestured to a chair. "You covered your tracks well, but eventually I remembered your brother lived in Atlanta. From there it was just a matter of checking marketing firms until I found you." I nodded. It was a reasonable approach, one I had known was possible, but considered unlikely given James's tendency to delegate difficult tasks. "Why are you here, James?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I remembered well. "Why am I here? Are you serious? You disappeared. You took money from the company. You sent those emails to our clients. The SEC is investigating my father. Our entire life has fallen apart, and you're asking why I'm here?" "Our life," I repeated quietly. "Was it ever really our life, James? Or was it your life that I was permitted to orbit around as long as I stayed in my designated place?" He looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? We had everything, a beautiful home, successful careers, respect in the community." "You had those things," I corrected him. "I had the illusion of them, contingent on my continued invisibility." I gestured to the chair again, more firmly this time. "Sit down, James. If we're going to have this conversation, let's have it properly." To my mild surprise, he complied. Up close, he looked even worse, defeated in a way I had never seen before. Part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, felt satisfaction at this visible evidence of his suffering. "Everything's gone," he said, his voice hollow. "The company is under SEC investigation. We've had to sell the house. Dad's in the hospital, heart attack last week. His reputation is ruined because of that old case you somehow found. Mum's a mess, even Vanessa." He trailed off. "What about Vanessa?" I prompted, curious despite myself. "She sent you an email, didn't she? Threatening you?" I nodded. Vanessa had indeed sent a lengthy, vitriolic email accusing me of destroying the family out of jealousy and threatening vague but ominous consequences. I had forwarded it directly to Patricia, who had reported it to the police as a precaution. "She's facing potential charges for that," James said. "Harassment, threats, on top of everything else." He looked up at me, his expression shifting from defeat to anger. "Was this what you wanted? To destroy everyone?" "No," I said honestly. "I didn't want to destroy anyone. I simply wanted to be seen, to be valued, to be treated as an equal partner in our marriage and our business. When I discovered that was never going to happen, that in fact you and your family were actively working against me, I chose to leave. Those emails were private, he muttered. Yes, I agreed. Private conversations about how to manipulate and ultimately remove me from my own life, private plans to take credit for my work, private discussions about your affair with Emily. He flinched at the mention of Emily. That wasn't serious, it was just, please don't insult my intelligence, I interrupted. Not anymore, we're beyond that now. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of deception and disappointment hanging between us. Finally, James spoke again, his voice quieter. I didn't come here to fight, Melanie. I came because I need to understand. How did we get here? When did you change? The question was so typically James, centered on his perception, his experience, that I almost laughed. I didn't change, James. I woke up. There's a difference. I pulled out a folder from my desk drawer and slid it across to him. These are divorce papers. Patricia has been in contact with your lawyer for weeks. Everything is fair, I'm not asking for ongoing support or additional compensation beyond what was legally mine to begin with. I simply want a clean break. He stared at the folder without opening it. Is there any way we could try again? Start over somehow? I know I made mistakes, but... James, I cut him off gently. The woman you want to start over with doesn't exist. She was a creation, partly yours, partly mine, partly your family's. The real me is sitting across from you now, and she isn't going back to being invisible. I loved you, he said, and I thought I detected a hint of genuine emotion. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but you loved a version of me that fit conveniently into your world. You never saw all of me. You never wanted to. He opened the folder slowly, glancing through the documents inside. You were planning this for months. Yes. You recorded everything, copied emails, gathered evidence. Yes. He looked up at me, a new expression in his eyes, something like grudging respect mixed with fear. I never knew you could be so calculating. You never really knew me at all, I replied simply. That was the problem. James sat back in his chair, studying me as if seeing me for the first time. Vanessa's joke at the barbecue, that's what triggered all this, isn't it? I shook my head. It wasn't the joke. It was everyone's reaction to it. It was your reaction, James. You laughed. You patted her arm like she'd said something clever instead of cruel. In that moment, I saw the truth about my place in your family. It was just a stupid joke, he protested weakly. No, I said firmly. It was the truth. If I disappeared, no one would notice. So I decided to test that theory. His expression darkened. We noticed, Melanie. The whole world noticed. Look at what's happened. You didn't notice me disappearing, I clarified. You noticed the consequences of my disappearance. There's a difference. We lapsed into silence again. Outside, my office window, Atlanta traffic moved steadily along Peachtree Street. My new life continued, even as I sat facing the ghost of my old one. Finally, James picked up the divorce papers. I'll have these reviewed and signed. I nodded. Thank you. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. I was angry when I found out what you'd done. Furious, actually. I wanted to hate you for destroying everything. He shook his head slowly. But then I realized something. You were right about one thing, Melanie. You were invisible. That's why none of us saw you coming. With that, he was gone, leaving me alone with the strange feeling that for the first time in our relationship, James had actually seen me clearly. 1 year later, I stood on the rooftop deck of my new condo in Midtown Atlanta, watching the sunset paint the skyline in shades of gold and pink. Music and laughter drifted up from the gathering I was hosting, a combination 4th of July celebration and 1-year anniversary of my freedom. Horizon Marketing had promoted me to partner 6 months earlier, after my work with regional healthcare providers expanded into a national campaign that garnered industry awards. I had my own team now, young marketers I mentored with an emphasis on recognition and credit for their contributions. My personal life had blossomed as well. I had reconnected with my family, spending holidays in Tennessee for the first time in years. My brother Alex and I had weekly dinner dates where we made up for lost time. I had even started seeing someone, a literature professor named David, who saw and appreciated me exactly as I was. The divorce had been finalised without drama. James had signed the papers and respected my wishes for no further contact. Bennett Marketing had eventually been sold to a larger agency after the SEC investigation resulted in substantial fines, but no criminal charges. Richard had recovered from his heart attack, but retired from public life entirely. Vanessa's harassment charges had been reduced to a warning after she agreed to leave the state. Last I heard, she was trying to rebuild her life on the West Coast. The most surprising development had been my friendship with Catherine. After that initial phone call, we had stayed in touch. When she finally left Michael 6 months after my departure, I had helped her find an apartment in Atlanta and introduced her to my growing circle of friends. "There you are." Catherine's voice broke into my thoughts as she joined me on the rooftop deck. "Everyone's looking for you downstairs. David's telling that hilarious story about his disastrous first lecture again." I smiled. "I'll be down in a minute. Just wanted a moment to take it all in." Catherine nodded understandingly, leaning against the railing beside me. 1 year, she mused. Hard to believe so much has changed. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Leaving?" She shook her head decisively. "Not for a second. Best decision I ever made. Second only to your decision, which gave me the courage to make mine." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as dusk deepened. "Oh, I almost forgot to tell you," Catherine said suddenly. "I ran into Diane yesterday." My attention snapped back to her. "Diane Bennett? Here in Atlanta?" Catherine nodded. "At Lenox Mall. She's working at the Nordstrom perfume counter. Apparently, with everything that happened, their savings were mostly wiped out. She didn't recognize me at first. I think she's trained herself not to see people." From before, I tried to imagine proud perfectionist Diane Bennett spritzing perfume on strangers for commission. It was difficult to reconcile with the woman who had scrutinized my table settings and dismissed my grandmother's pie. "Did you speak to her?" I asked. "Briefly. When she realized who I was, she looked like she wanted to disappear. Then she saw you weren't with me and got this look of relief that quickly turned to panic when she realized I might tell you I'd seen her." "What did you say to her?" Catherine smiled slightly. "Nothing much. Just that I was doing well, living in Atlanta now. She asked, very reluctantly, if I ever saw you. I said yes, that you were thriving, partner at a successful firm, happy, surrounded by people who value you." "And how did she respond to that?" "She didn't, really. Just got this faraway look and said, 'I always told Richard that girl would land on her feet.' As if she'd been your champion all along." Catherine shook her head. "The capacity for self-deception in that family is truly remarkable." I laughed, softly. "Indeed it is." We were interrupted by David calling up from the stairwell. "Mel, are you up here? We're about to start the fireworks." "Coming," I called back. Catherine touched my arm before we headed downstairs. "You know, there's something I never told you. At that barbecue, after Vanessa made that awful joke and you left the table, I confronted James. I told him he should be ashamed for letting his sister speak to his wife that way." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "You did? What did he say?" "He said I was overreacting, that you were fine, that you knew it was just Vanessa being Vanessa." She shook her head. I remember thinking, he doesn't see her at all. And the sad thing was, neither did I, not really. None of us saw the strength you had inside you. As we rejoined the party, I was struck by the contrast between this 4th of July and the one a year ago. Then I had been surrounded by people who looked through me. Now I was encircled by friends and loved ones who truly saw me, my talents, my quirks, my full authentic self. David slipped his arm around my waist as we gathered on the balcony for the fireworks. "Everything okay?" he murmured. "You seem deep in thought up there." Everything's perfect, I assured him, and meant it. As the first fireworks exploded, across the Atlanta sky, I reflected on visibility, what it means to be truly seen, to be valued, to occupy space unapologetically in the world. The Bennett family had tried to make me invisible, but in doing so, they had given me the ultimate power. I had seen them clearly while remaining unseen myself. In the end, Vanessa's cruel joke had contained an unintended truth. If I disappeared, no one in that family would notice, not because I didn't matter, but because they had never actually seen me in the first place. Their loss, as it turned out, not mine. The spectators around me gasped as a particularly spectacular burst of colour filled the sky. I joined them, no longer a shadow at the edges of someone else's life, but fully present in my own. Have you ever had to remake yourself after being invisible for too long? Sometimes the people who should see us most clearly, family, partners, close friends, are the ones who see only what they want to see. My journey from invisibility to living fully seen taught me that true visibility starts with seeing yourself clearly first. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family dynamics or reclaiming your power. Drop a comment below about a time you had to stand up for yourself in a family situation, and if you want more stories about finding justice and rebuilding after family betrayal, please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. Remember, the people who truly mar